Reading in college composition isn't the same as reading a fiction book, and so we have some special things that we like to do, and we're going to practice by requiring some annotations. And then from that point on, as long as you openly discuss and it's apparent that you've done the reading and thought about it, then it won't be assigned. But if it becomes apparent that reading isn't happening and or annotations aren't happening, I'll start assigning them as assignments. So you get to decide the course of your future. So we read differently when we are going to write about something, and we save our time if we do the annotations as we're reading the article or the source document. Reading is really the first step in the writing process. We read to figure out what we think, to inform ourselves of something, and then we'll start the writing process. So most of what you write in college is going to be in response to something that you read. So get used to doing annotations early. And you can do these electronically. There's lots of PDF markup things that you can use if you want to do it electronically. Or you can print out the source material and annotate by hand. You can take notes. You can use Post-it notes. You get to decide how, because that depends to a certain extent on your learning style. But then there's some commonalities. The first thing is that you want to identify the issues, and that's particularly important when it's a topic that either we're not familiar with or we don't really have an opinion on. It's important to first we think about what's the issue that they're discussing. Also in annotations, you should start making judgments about the truth of what the writers tell them. In other words, question everything. What kind of evidence is your source using? What kind of proof is there? Or are they just using rhetoric? And then evaluate the adequacy of the evidence used to support the argument. In other words, if the evidence is because I saw it once, maybe not the best source. If the evidence is studies or other academic sources, then you have the evidence needed to support the argument. And that's part of your job as a critical reader, is to look at that source material and see if it fits that guideline. Annotating is really just about leaving your mark on the page, and there's a video in the course content that walks you through some techniques that you might use for the annotations. It's basically the first place where you start to engage with the ideas that you're reading about. When you're in my class, I expect you to have an opinion on just about everything, so you may as well start doing that as you're reading. Question and test those ideas. See if it passes your credibility test, if it passes the test of something that you're interested in pursuing. And then ask yourself if this is a significant concept or idea, or if this is just a gimme, like a throwaway reading, right? Critical reading is active reading. So it's not about memorizing. Memorizing is actually a lower level learning. What you want to do is bring your experiences, your knowledge, and your interests to the text so that you can continue the conversation the writer has begun. And we'll see that my readings change every semester, but we're going to see how many people write on the same topic. We call that entering the conversation. And so you're wanting to see and understand the source document so that you can continue that discussion in your own paper. And you bring your own experience and your own knowledge and your own interest to that. So even though most of the time we tell you not to write in the first person for academic writing, it's your experience and your knowledge. If you can attach what you're reading to existing knowledge, it'll be easier for you to remember and to retrieve that information, and that's what annotation helps you to start identifying those things. Think strategically, because these things are going to help you when we discuss it in class and when you write the paper. Figure out what the writer's claims are. What are the claims to begin with, and then you look at what are their key ideas and terms. Oftentimes the writer will identify how they're defining a particular term. You don't have to agree with the definition, but it helps everybody start on the same page. And then find connections between claims and terms. So what are the connections between this writer's claims, but then does it go across other readings that you have and other terminology that are tied to that? And start to recognize what is the larger conversation that this particular topic joins, and how is this writer connected to that information. So one of the topics that we often cover is poverty, and I have an essay that we often read called What is Poverty? you may have a different experience with poverty, and so you would join that conversation based on your claims and your evidence. Think strategically as far as asking yourself, what arguments is the author responding to? Not every essay is, but then there are other essays, it's obvious because they quote another source and they're sort of taking issue with another source, or they're using that source to back up their own claims. Is the issue relevant or significant? If it's not, why are we studying it, right? How do I know what the author says is true? They should be providing evidence. They should tell you why they should be trusted. That's part of establishing their credibility, right? And that's when you start to ask, how is their evidence legitimate and sufficient? Or is it legitimate and sufficient? And then can you think of exceptions to that argument? What would the counter arguments be? When we get to writing an argument, well, one of the things that you have to do is figure out what the other side thinks or believes on a topic, and then provide a counter argument to that belief. So you start thinking of those things when you're reading. We'll bring them up when we're discussing them, so that by the time that you write a paper on a particular topic, you should be fully informed on that topic. Good readers consider not just what is said or the content, but how it is said, while considering the writer's purpose and the audience. And that's part of the writing process, is figuring out who your audience is and what the purpose is. When you are reading somebody else's work, it's important to figure out who their audience is. All right, so why annotate? It makes it easier to participate in our class discussions if you've already marked passages that are important or confusing, or linked to passages in another text that we've read that you maybe think they're in conflict or they're similar. The act of annotating key ideas and connections is the start of the writing process. So you can quote, like if you mark up your passages, you're kind of identifying which arguments or claims that you want to discuss in your own paper, and which quotes you might want to use, and then how you can explain the significance of that. So you're starting pre-writing just by reading the source document. You annotate key facts that influence the topic, the situation that motivates the author's analysis. You make connections to your experience or other readings. So sometimes it's about the retrieval process that we studied a couple weeks back, where if we can tie it to something we already know or we've already studied, we're teaching our brain how to access that information again. Essentially, you're reverse engineering an outline when you make an annotation. You're bringing your own experience into the conversation. It makes it more relevant for you. It helps you to find the information later, and it gives you ideas of what you might be interested in pursuing in a paper. That's it for annotations. Make sure you watch the video How to Annotate, and we'll discuss